Today, we're diving into a field of neuroscience that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction. It's called photobiomodulation, and it's all built on one pretty wild idea. What if something as simple as light could be the key to healing our most complex and stubborn brain disorders?
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Using light to heal the brain? It sounds a little out there, right? But the science behind it is very, very real. And it forces us to ask this incredible question. Can we actually use focused beams of light to repair and even rejuvenate the human brain? Well, the research is starting to point to a very surprising yes.
So, to really get why this approach is so revolutionary, we've got to look at the problem in a totally new way. We're not just going to talk about individual diseases. We're going to talk about a vulnerability they all share, a deep, fundamental breakdown in the brain's power supply. You could call it a cellular energy crisis.
Yep, you heard that right. It turns out that a huge number of neurological and even psychological problems all share a common thread. Their mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside our cells, they just start to fail. It's called mitochondrial dysfunction. And when that happens in an organ as energy hungry as the brain, well, the consequences can be absolutely devastating.
And this is what's so powerful about this way of thinking. It connects a whole range of conditions that we usually think of as separate. I mean, everything from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's to the damage from a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, and even things like depression and anxiety. They all seem to tie back to the same basic failure of energy in our neurons. So that raises a massive question, doesn't it? What if we could stop trying to treat all these different symptoms and just fix the power supply itself?
And this right here is where things get really, really cool. Because the potential solution isn't some complicated new drug with a long list of side effects. Nope, it's something far more fundamental. Something that's both elegant and completely unexpected. It's light.
The official name for this therapy is brain photobiomodulation, or PBM for short. It's a non-invasive technique that uses very specific wavelengths of red and near-infrared light. The whole goal is to shine this light on neural tissue to wake up the cells and kickstart the brain's own energy-making and repair systems. This is a huge shift in thinking, It's about treating the brain's metabolism, not just its chemistry.
Honestly, the best way to picture this is to think about your brain cells as having tiny little batteries inside them. Those are the mitochondria. And in a lot of these diseases, those batteries are just running low. Photobiomodulation is kind of like a super-targeted jumpstart, using a spark of light to recharge those cellular batteries right at the source.
So how in the world does light actually recharge a cell? I mean, it sounds like magic, but the biology behind it is just fascinating. Let's break down exactly how this process works.
Okay, quick refresher. I promise it'll be painless. Our cells get their juice from these amazing little organelles called mitochondria. Their whole job, 24/7, is to crank out ATP, which is the energy molecule that fuels pretty much everything a cell does. When mitochondria slow down, ATP production drops and the cell is in big trouble. These little power plants are the exact target of PBM.
So here's how it goes down. First, that special red or near-infrared light shines into the neuron and gets absorbed by the mitochondria. Now inside, there's a really important enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase. Let's just call it CCO. Think of CCO as a tiny light-activated switch. The problem is, this switch often gets clogged up by another molecule, nitric oxide, which basically slams the brakes on energy production. But, and this is the key, when a photon of light of just the right color hits CCO, it literally knocks that nitric oxide molecule off. The brake is released, and suddenly, CCO is free to work at full speed, and the ATP energy factory just goes into overdrive.
But get this, that initial energy boost is really just the spark. It sets off this incredible cascade of positive effects that ripple through the brain. The therapy helps calm down chronic inflammation, it fights off damaging oxidative stress, and it can even stop cells from dying prematurely. But it's not just playing defense. It's also going on offense by encouraging the growth of brand new neurons and helping to form new connections between them. It's like a total repair and rejuvenation package for the brain.
Okay, I know there's probably a big question nagging at you, because it was definitely nagging at me. This all sounds amazing, but how on earth do you get light deep inside the brain? I mean, we've all got a pretty thick skull in the way, right? And that, right there, is the single biggest engineering challenge for PBM therapy.
And this number really puts that challenge in perspective. For one of the most common types of light used, only about 3.7% of it
actually makes it through the frontal bone. Just think about that. A huge chunk of that precious energy gets blocked or scattered before it can even get to work.
So, to get around this problem, researchers have come up with some seriously clever solutions. The most common is the transcranial method, which is basically applying a really powerful light source right onto the scalp. It's non-invasive, but it's best for stuff closer to the surface. Then there's the intranasal approach, which is kind of wild. It uses the nasal cavity as a shortcut, a sort of backdoor to the brain, to bypass the thickest parts of the skull. And for really deep brain targets, like the ones you need to reach for Parkinson's, they've even developed an intracranial method, where a tiny optical fiber is implanted to deliver light with surgical precision.
So, the theory holds up, and the delivery methods are pretty ingenious. But that brings us to the real million-dollar question. Does it actually work when you test it? Let's take a look at what the evidence from the labs and the clinics is actually showing us.
One of the absolute most important things to understand about all PBM research is something called the biphasic dose response, or a much easier way to think of it is the Goldilocks effect. See, too little light does nothing. But, and this is the surprising part, too much light can actually shut things down or even cause damage. The therapeutic magic only happens in that narrow, just right window. And that makes figuring out the perfect dose for every person in every condition incredibly critical and also really, really tricky. Now, in animal studies, the results have been super encouraging. For instance, one study showed that after PBM treatment, the activity of that key CCO enzyme jumped by 14% in the prefrontal cortex of rats. I mean, that's hard biological proof that the light is getting where it needs to and it's flipping the right switches.
But, and this is a really big but, moving from a controlled lab with rats to the messy complexity of human patients is a giant leap. And here, the road has been a lot bumpier. Just look at the NEAS 3 trials. This was a massive test of PBM for people who had just had a stroke. The early results looked great, but the final, huge trial was actually stopped early because it just wasn't showing a benefit. That was a major setback, and it's a sobering reminder of just how hard this is. It could have failed for any number of reasons. Maybe the dose was wrong, or the timing was off, or maybe the light just wasn't powerful enough. It really highlights how you have to get every single little parameter exactly right for it to work.
So, where does a disappointment like that leave the whole field? Well, you might think it would be discouraging, but it's actually the opposite. Researchers are more determined than ever. They don't see these challenges as a dead end. They see them as crucial clues on the path to finally unlocking the incredible potential of this whole new way of looking at brain health.
So, what are the big things to take away from all this? First, PBM is a totally new paradigm. It's about treating the brain's metabolism, its energy, not just its chemistry. Second, its power comes from a 1-2 punch, boosting energy and triggering this whole cascade of repair and protection. Third, the biggest hurdle, at the end of the day, is a physics problem, just getting enough light to the right spot. And finally, yeah, we still have a long way to go to get this into clinics, but the potential here is just way too big to ignore.
So as we look to the future, as the technology gets smarter and our understanding gets deeper, we're left with this really fascinating question. Could we one day see a simple, easy-to-use device, maybe something like a helmet of light, become a standard tool not just for treating diseases after they happen, but for proactively keeping our brains healthy and maybe even enhancing them as we get older? That's the provocative question that's driving this entire amazing field forward.